Welcome back to the Casual Car Camper. I'm your host Brian, and today I have a electric coffee kettle. We're going to test it out today. It was given to me by my parents, so we're going to look this gift horse in the mouth and see if it still works. So I have some coffee, some water here. It's a little warmer. I'm not actually going to make anything in this today. I just want to see if it still works. Running off my jump box. So this is another one of those, hey, family member has old camping equipment laying around, let's see what happens. So we're going to set this up. It might be missing parts. My plan is if I do want to make coffee in this, I am going to keep this little piece on the bottom and just make a tea bag for coffee, put it right in here, and let it boil. So we're going to leave that go for a few minutes, see if we start getting anything out of the electric coil. Already got some oxygen build up around that, so it's a good sight. So I'm going to pause the video and I'll let you know what happens. Okay, campers, I'm back. I've been left this for about a half hour and got nothing, and then I just started playing with the tip. It appears that this does have a light to let you know it's going. The problem is it's just been sitting for a long time, so it appears as if I need to pull it apart and clean up the cord and clean up the plug in order to really see it, get this working, because right now it's gotten colder. I'm going to leave it for a little while now that I see that it's actually on right now. Okay, campers, we're back. I left this for another 20 minutes or so after plugging in. It is warm. I'm not sure it's actually going to boil the water, but if you're just trying to make tea, this will be good. I'll do some experiments and do a follow-up video, but for today we're going to call it. Okay, campers, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave a comment down below in the comment section or contact me on the Casual Car Camper on Facebook, and I'll be sure to get back to you. And remember, as always, as long as you're having fun, you're doing camping right. Hello, campers. Welcome back to the Casual Car Camper. I'm your host, Brian. Today, we're going to continue with this old coffee maker I was given by my parents. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the DC outlet plug on it because this is really badly corroded and it was actually heating up when I tried testing it earlier. So I just want to start with a fresh plug. So I picked up a fresh plug at Walmart. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this switch box that I have hooked up to a battery to test positive and negative, so I know which of these two wires is the positive and negatives because they're not marked. And to do that, I'm going to use my trusty multimeter, and I will walk you through each step of this. Starting tools for this are, as always, my trusty multimeter, electrical tape, wire strippers, wire cutters, obviously what I'm going to be fixing, and then I have some heat shrink tubing and my trusty unboxing knife so that I can make cuts as I need, and a soldering iron and solder. And always for safety, while I'm using a welding mat, I'm also going to use a small ceramic piece of tile to solder on so that I don't have to worry about setting a fire or burning my workspace. So our first step is we're going to get some power running to this plug, and we're going to take our multimeter, connect it to our two ends, and I'm getting a negative, so I'm going to switch it. I'm getting positive voltage. The battery this is hooked up to looks like it's losing voltage, but I'm getting just enough that I can tell that this is my positive, this is my negative, this is my positive. So we're going to turn that off to save that battery. We're going to turn this off to save that battery. This is my positive, so I'm going to spread it out a little bit, take a very small amount of red electrical tape,
down. They'll probably come off later, depending on how much space I have. I'm going to put this off to the side. I'm going to put my multimeter off to the side. So now we have to cut off our old adapter, power plug. As soon as... So I always Velcro my wires to keep them organized, and sometimes the Velcro doesn't like to get out of my way. We're going to be working with heat guns and hot solder, so I'm going to pull this all the way off so I don't have to worry about potential fire. Okay, so we have our wires, and when you pull them off, I'm pulling this apart so I can look at see which wire is connected to the plunger and which wire is connected to the side pieces. Your plunger is going to be your positive, your side pieces are going to be your negative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread these out a little bit more because I'll have to anyways to do my soldering. I'm going to take another small piece of red electrical tape. Put it down here so I know which one's my positive. The reason I'm doing that is because once I cut off the ends, the wire is identical on both sides, and I do not want to short circuit my coffee pot, so I'm going to just make sure that even though it's a very simple, it's just a heating element and a light, I don't want to risk short circuiting it because it could still damage the light. So our next step is we're going to take our cutters, cut it. And another thing you can do to make sure that you don't confuse your wires is just solder one side at a time, and that's what I'm going to do. But I always like to have double security when I'm doing stuff. And that's not quite enough wire. The old adage, measure twice, cut once. With soldering, it's just as true because you're going to be reducing your amount of wire if you don't have a lot of wire to start with. Like a lot of these plugs don't really have a lot. If you have to start cutting because you cross-wired something, or your thing that you just soldered is now no longer usable because you shorted it. What I'm doing right now is I'm dry fitting my shrink tubing, trying to find the right thickness of shrink tubing. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut this shrink tubing down because I don't need it this long. I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just twist these two wires together and then line up my shrink tube. And I want and line it up so that I have a little bit of extra on either side, and then I'm going to cut it. This serves two purposes. One, it decreases excess material around your soldering, and two, it doubles the amount of material you have to work with. You can solder twice as much if you're cutting your shrink tube in half. In some areas you do need larger amounts of shrink tubing. So we're going to put that on, and at the end I want to put this larger piece of shrink tubing over to hold the entire piece together. So what I'm trying to do right now is see if I can get away with doing that. Okay, so we were able to get our overall cover shrink tube on. What we're going to do is we're just going to use a hammer or a pair of pliers and just break this off later. if we decide we need to, this might work as a secondary handle. I don't know. But right now, I would rather have only one wire cut at a time, just for convenience. Okay, so now we have our big heat tube. We have more length on this side than we do on this side, so I'm going to put the small tube on and push it down as far as it'll go so that it's out of my way so I don't accidentally shrink it while I'm soldering. Then I'm going to fan my wires out. This is how I like to splice wires when I'm soldering. I fan them out as best I can. Then I'm going to push them together and let them overlap. And I'm going to then twist them. This gives me a flatter profile. And it also gets the wires more entangled with each other and gives you a less resistant connection. So now that is all set. So now we're just going to take our solder. I like to get a good amount so that I can hold a good amount away from. I have a good distance between my hand and the heat source. Then we're going to just heat up the gun, and we want to only keep it on for about 40 seconds. Turn on your power source first. So we're going to heat that up, and we're going to count 40 seconds. While we do this, and just let the wire heat up, and the idea is to heat up the wire so that it melts the solder and draws it through. What I'm going to do is, to keep this wire out of my way, I'm just going to use my pliers to hold it back. It just took a little while to get the copper heated up, but now I'm getting a nice solder. As you can see, when it melts, it flows to the heat source. Unfortunately, I had to lay it down on my plate, but that's another reason why it's good to use something that's a good heat sink, like a ceramic piece of tile, because you can lay it down and hold it in place. I think I got it. So I just got to do the other side now. So unfortunately, because the copper was so thick, I wasn't able to draw it through from one side to the other, but I was able to heat it up and then draw it left to right. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing. On the opposite side. As you can see, it's melting, and then it's as a liquid, it flows towards. Okay, welcome back, campers. We had a little trouble with the electrical outside, so we moved inside so that we could get a little bit better electrical connection, so my soldering equipment will work a little bit better. So where I left you off, I was finishing up the solder on the positive wire. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my now take my shrink tube, put it over the wire, and I'm actually, because I'm using the same plug for both, I am just going to leave it there while I take and move on to the positive. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim our positive right below where they soldered on. Correct. I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to my negative after I have my positive prepped. I'm going to trim the negative right below where they put the spring. Then I'm going to take my trusty strippers. Give myself a good amount of wire. Okay, so one thing I just noticed is I forgot to measure out my wire distances. The negative was actually much shorter than the positive. So there's two ways I can fix this. I can either solder in a small piece of wire in between, or I can connect them and then just have one side be a little bit longer, but this is going to add issues.
Option 3 is to shorten the positive wire.
Yes. Or I can take and cut the positive wire and resolder it. Of the three options, the one that, while it's probably the most work, is going to be the safest, is just to cut out my solder and then make the two wires equal length.
Alright, so I can cut to a quick shot here. If you just cut here, you can reuse the solder and just solder it to the next piece over.
I don't like to.
Burning the solder a couple of times loses the electrical property?
Yes.
That sucks.
Yeah, it's
Here, at the same time, if you've got it wrapped around the copper,
yeah.
keep making the main connection,
Actually, here's another option we can do.
just desolder it down.
Yeah. If it'll melt.
It'll melt now that we've got everything proper.
Yeah.
We've already got heat up, that's perfect. Here. Oh, third hand.
Yeah. As you can see, the way I connect them does give you a nice solid connection because it doesn't want to come apart even when you're applying heat. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to pull this off a little bit. So our wires on this end are the same length. My marker came off, but oh well. We know this is the positive because it's got the solder on it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and measure out my two lengths of wire here, and I'm going to, so you can see it, I'm going to trim my positive wire so that the insulation stops at the end of the wire I've already stripped. So now that can go in the trash. Now we're going to just take and re-strip this. Okay, so we have a bunch of solder on here, so it's going to be a little more difficult to intertwine it, but that's the beauty of soldering, is that you can get away with a lot more and still have a very stable connection. So we're just going to get some of this red out of the way because I'm using my heat shrink. So I took the red marker off because I'm using my heat shrink tube as a marker, and it allows me to get the heat shrink tube a little more away from the hot solder, the wire that's about to be very hot when I solder it. So what I'm going to do is, the wire that has the solder on it is fairly stiff, or is extremely stiff. It's like metal right now. So all I'm doing is I'm going to try and just wrap this around enough that I can just heat it, and it'll draw the solder through it and connect the two wires. Again, I'm doing this on top of my tile so that I don't have to worry about damaging the table underneath, and underneath the tile I have a welder's blanket. Both materials will help with heat absorption. As you can see, the solder is melting quite well and pulling through the newly exposed copper wire. But while it's hot, I do want to try and just crimp that together a little bit better. And these crimpers do have a edge that will allow me to push the wires together a little bit better. Now we're going to just add a little more copper wires, or a little more solder to this copper wire, so that I don't have to worry about this coming apart while camping. So I don't usually take solder equipment with me camping. So just to recap, when you are soldering, make sure all your wires are the same length. Check beforehand so that you don't have to circle back and redo anything. And another thing is when you use another pair of pliers, it will draw some of the heat away. So if you're worried about damaging the wire or something, you can use the pliers to draw heat away. Now we're going to let that cool for a minute because it's really hot. It's actually melted some of my shrink tube. It's starting to shrink down, so might be a little difficult to get this shrink tube over. Okay, so that's cooling, but my shrink tube has shrunk down, so I'm going to take... Alright, so my shrink tube has shrunk down a little bit on the end, so I'm going to take a pair of scissors, very carefully, trim off the end by first snipping there. Then I'm going to take, so that should be just enough that I can move, it down over my solder point. And unfortunately, it looks like a solder job is a little too thick, so I can't get my shrink tube over. So what we're going to do is, since we're using the larger shrink tube, I'm just going to use a little electrical tape over this, and I'll do that after I get this piece soldered on. That way latent heat doesn't melt the electrical tape. So we're going to just weave these two together. Twist them. That's the other advantage of using where you weave them together, is that it's not as thick, so it doesn't create a bulge, where the method I had to do up here created a bit of a bulge. Oh well. Happy accidents, as they say. Learning moments, or teachable moments. Do you want to zoom in on this? Alright, so now we're just going to, again, just heat up our wire. Gonna flip it over, make sure the back of it is also soldered. Nope, the solder did not pull through, so I'm just gonna do the exact same thing. Heat up the wire, get the solder close so it pulls through. They have kits you can get that will hold your work for you while you solder. I had one, but the pieces, I wore it out, so I have to get a new one. And there we go. And we have a nice soldered piece.
Which you didn't put any shrink tubing in for.
Nope, I did not use any shrink tubing, so I forgot.
That's okay. Hit them with wire on both ends. The shrink tubing will hold it in.
Yep. I do like to use shrink tubing, but sometimes you just forget, and so we're just gonna When you wrap with the tape, you're just going to overlap about 25% of your last turn. Keep it nice and protected. Then we're going to take our large piece of shrink tubing, which we designed so that we could hold the wires together. Hook up my heat gun. This is going to get very loud, but what you do is when you're using the heat gun, you're going to just move slowly back and forth. You don't want to have any one area with too much heat too quickly, because you want it to shrink down evenly as much as possible. Okay, so the wires on this end were thicker than the wires on this end, so I have a little bit of a spot that it just did not close down all the way, but even though I'm using marine heat shrink tubing, which means it does have a waterproofing agent in there, I'm going to just wrap the end so moisture doesn't get in on this end. Alright, so we have a repaired. Now all I need is a way to test it. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave it for 5-10 minutes and see if the outside gets hotter. Make sure nowhere else is hot. Welcome back, campers. After leaving this for about almost a half hour, it's hot, but it doesn't seem to be drawing power. We did have it where it was drawing power, but it was melting the wire, so I changed the system that it was drawing power through, which seems to have a resistor to stop overdraw. So the equipment I'm using is possibly not producing enough power for this system to really draw from. I mean, it's hot, but it feels like hot enough for a hot cup of tea, not for a cup of coffee. So I'm going to do some more experiments, and then I'll just at some point just give you a update on whether I'm using it, how much I like it. Okay, campers, we're back, and I've picked up a inverter block, and I've got my tablet to act as a stopwatch, and we're going to see how long it will take this to boil water, if it will boil water in perfect conditions, which is what this will do. Now, there's a chance this might, I think this is a safety net. Hopefully it does. We'll see if this works. You know, sometimes you put a lot of work into refurbishing something and it doesn't refurb. We're going to find out today if that's the case with this unit. Okay, light is on. It's taking juice. So now we're going to start the stopwatch. So we'll get a idea of how long it takes us. Turn out quite a bit of light. And even, you know, depending on how long it actually takes to boil the water for making coffee would also depend whether or not this is something worth taking with you. But since I've had trouble with every other source of battery power I've used, I'm probably not going to use this, even if it does work with this, for boiling water at the campsite, because I have, fire. I have a lot of ways of making fire, which I'm finding as far as making coffee goes, most electric things just take too long. Okay, campers, I'm going to switch to a close-up view of this, and you're going to watch it water boil at probably 16 times speed. campers, so I just came in to check on this, and it's off. It looks like, or it feels like the new connector had a failure. It's pretty hot. It's split. The inverter's quite warm too, but it feels like it's still okay. So this is it. Now I have hot water here. It almost feels hot enough to make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or something. So I might make myself one. I don't know. But it's since I've repaired this thing, or even from the beginning, it just seems to draw way too much energy. So if you find an old coffee pot like this at a tag sale, I pass that up because I've had nothing but trouble with it. Okay, campers, I hope you enjoyed this little video series on this, the various things I did to fix it and the little tricks I showed you along the way. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave a comment in the comment section below or contact me on the Casual Car Camper on Facebook. And remember, as always, as long as you're having fun, you're doing camping right.